My name's Ayden Machajewski, and for the past month, I've been playing through every Paper Mario game, analyzing each game's soundtrack and writing videos like this that dissect the techniques and shortcomings in each soundtrack. I've discussed music theory, composition, scoring, preferences, remixes, leitmotif, continuity, and adaptive techniques. Each game in the series seems to excel in a few of these areas while lacking in the others. Today, we're wrapping up this series by finally analyzing Paper Mario: The Origami King. The game released a few weeks ago on July 17th for the Nintendo Switch. What really excites me about Origami King is the way it seems to take all the musical strengths of each previous Paper Mario game into one cohesive soundtrack. Let's take a closer look. For Paper Mario 64 and Thousand Year Door, I analyzed the music that played alongside their opening storybook sequences. Over the course of the series' history, they've gradually shifted away from these storybook openings in favor of more cinematic openings. Come Origami King, and it isn't even a true cutscene anymore. The player has to advance through a block of text right off the bat. Now, there's a huge musical advantage to true, non-interactable cutscenes. Since the timing is the exact same every go-through, you can score the events precisely, like with a film or a TV score. However, for a game reliant on text, you run the risk of outpacing your player's reading speed. Paper Mario's style won't allow for voice acting, so all you can do is keep the text slow or go largely without text, like how Color Splash's opening cutscene works. Origami King, however, strikes a good balance between both interactive and non-interactive segments for its opening. For text, that is, the exposition Luigi gives, the player is in full control of the pace, meaning the soundtrack has to employ some form of loop. But when the game wants to take a moment to show the environment or to focus on the action, it seamlessly takes away control from the player. Likewise, the soundtrack can transition into something linear to score this action precisely. This hybrid system is great for the gameplay, but it does make scoring a lot trickier. The game opens with a piano and marimba vamp. The quick pace and syncopated piano chords brings a lot of energy to this initial moment, but the sparse and staccato instrumentation keeps things simple and lighthearted as we're introduced to the brothers. The music is a 16-bar loop, or really an 8-bar loop, since the only thing that changes between the first and second halves is the piano bass line. Everything else stays the same. The descending line in the marimba is reminiscent of the intro music in both 64 and Thousand Year Door. This sort of rapid descending line is very common, but I'd like to think it's an intentional musical parallel. This chord progression has some interesting colors as well. See the flat 7 chord in the second bar here, and the movement to the relative minor in the 5th bar. You actually see these motions a lot in the game, as they often accompany the main theme. Anyways, keeping a simple vamp like this is great for dialogue, because it can set the mood without pulling attention away from the text. Speaking of which, this loop is really short, but since there's only 3 dialogue boxes to read, which themselves only have a couple of lines each, it's not likely to play enough times to be distracting or annoying. To further prevent stagnation, a new layer of flute and clarinet is added on top of this vamp once the player is done reading. Adaptive music techniques like this are great for creating motion in a piece of music, even when the timing itself is indeterminate. There's also just enough time between when this layer first fades in to when the track fades out, for you to hear the game's main theme at least once in its entirety. From here we get a string of silence and ambient music, appropriate for reflecting the empty state of Toad Town. The soundtrack is doing most of the heavy lifting at this point, really trying to sell the mysterious nature of the town. From there, the music swells as we pan over Peach's castle, foreshadowing the sinister forces that it currently houses. We get a more substantial string orchestration here as well, playing the game's main motif by essentially moving it up a diminished triad, C, E flat, G flat, and then A, which is spelled as B double flat in this context. Check out how the last motion from the major G flat chord to an E-flat major 7 flat 5 chord creates a mysterious, ominous feeling. Notice in particular how the chord is voiced. The tonic E-flat is reserved for the bass, while the strings hold the rest of the voices. The top note, B double flat, creates a tritone with the bass, and a diminished third with the G natural below it, resulting in a particularly tense voicing. This is just such a good motion. Right off the bat with his intro, Origami King is showing the player it has the tonal range to cover both its light-hearted comedy bits, its more ominous story bits, and everything in between. Now, if you couldn't already tell by the intro music, Origami King is not at all shy about using adaptive music techniques. In the Graffiti Underground, you're treated to a remix of the classic Mario Underground theme with a good helping of vertical layering. When you first enter, it's just the melodic elements. But once you turn on the lights, a funky drum and bass groove gets added. Except now, when you move on to the next dark room, or if you go back and turn the lights off, the melodic elements will cut out instead, leaving only the rhythm section. Keeping the driving drum and bass parts helps maintain the energy level throughout this area, rather than constantly jerking back and forth between a light, mysterious underground theme and a heavy, funky version. This soundtrack isn't afraid to push the boundaries of what you would typically expect for adaptive music systems. Generally, vertical layering would require you to have all your layers be in the same time signature so that they all sync up properly. But listen to how Origami King transitions between 4/4 and 3/4 as you walk down to the harbor from Toad Town. It's actually a relatively common metric modulation, from a quarter note to a dotted quarter note. It's just rare to hear such a dramatic rhythmic transition handled by an indeterminately timed adaptive music system. Listen again, this time with a click track to help indicate the consistent pulse through this fade transition. This is fantastic. The harbor theme already takes the melody of Toad Town and arranges it for a 3/4 sea shanty sort of feel. Syncing up the tempos this way with metric modulation allows for the melody to easily slip in and out of either arrangement. It's an incredibly creative use of vertical layering that really helps the harbor stand out musically without needing an awkward pause or cut. But above all else, the place where these adaptive techniques shine front and center is in the game's battle system. Reminiscent of how Sticker Star and Color Splash had low HP arrangements, every battle track in Origami King, all 18 of them, have thinking variations. Now, this is a pretty simple trick. When the player is focusing on the puzzles, you simply strip away all the busy melodic elements and let the rhythm section continue alone. Reducing the instrumentation this way defines a flow of energy between the calmer puzzle phase and the wackier attack and defense phases. It's incredibly effective, especially when the bass riding is as excellent as it is in this game. Oh, and I feel obligated to mention that the game still acknowledges low HP status, but instead of changing up the arrangement, it adds a low-pass filter over the audio. I feel like this is a better solution for the game's various different battle tracks than trying to add in an odd, quirky arrangement, especially considering the relatively darker tone of the game compared to Color Splash. Both the thinking variants and the low HP status are vertical layering techniques, and so don't change the timing of musical elements, only their volume or timbre. But there's also some sneaky cases of horizontal adaptive techniques. Listen closely to what happens when you finish the puzzle phase. That initial horn lick isn't actually in the default arrangement of the piece, but is one of several transition lines that helps bring back the main melody. It's responsive to when in the piece this transition happens, and it's always in time, aligned with the beat. There's a few different types depending on which section of the music you're in. Some battle themes also reinforce this transition with unique drums. Actually, drum breaks in general are a good get-out-of-jail-free card for dealing with tricky transitions. certainly a missable detail, but it goes a long way to smooth over the movement of energy in battles. Between these horizontal music additions and supporting sound effects, the transitions in and out of puzzle phase are seamless but still meaningful. In addition to the in-the-moment adaptive techniques, Origami King also uses its vast musical diversity to indicate long-term changes in the world. The first world's dungeon, Overlook Tower, has an ominous track when you first arrive, a frantic track for hunting down Goombas in the kitchen, an action track for dodging missiles, and a track if you return later in the game, after the elevator gets fixed. All of these tracks are exclusively for this location. Unlike Sticker Star and Color Splash, which would reuse tracks for similar enough events, no matter where in the game world they are, Origami King considers location in nearly every track in the game. And unlike Thousand Year Door and 64, which had pretty static location-based music, Origami King scores significant events within each location. It's a combination of these two styles that adds a lot more composition work, but really adds a lot more personality to the game's events. Origami King spared no expense in creating as many of these unique musical moments as possible. Sometimes it takes a page out of the Sticker Star and Color Splash playbook with wildly different tracks that stand out. More often, though, Origami King takes the opportunity to create these unique moments within the style of the rest of the soundtrack. As a result, Origami King manages to keep the lighthearted and comical moments of the newer games and combine them with an interconnected world that would not feel out of place with the older games. In other cases, it helps foster a sense of progression. Toad Town has at least 7 different versions of its theme, not counting the various shops and locations within it. It first changes when you finally defeat all the Paper Macho enemies in town. From there, it changes every time you remove another streamer. Similar to Color Splash's world map music, over the course of the game, more instruments will add to the Toad Town theme. And while the player isn't returning to Toad Town as often as they'd find themselves on Color Splash's world map, it still helps create that same sense of progression, especially as the town begins to repopulate with toads. Just a heads up, I'll be talking about major story elements in Origami King, so if you haven't finished the game yet, I'd recommend skipping to this timestamp, or using the timestamps in the description to jump to the conclusion. Now, if you've watched my other Paper Mario soundtrack reviews, you'll know I gave Super Paper Mario a 10 out of 10, primarily for how the key leitmotifs come together in the game's finale. I was really hoping to find a similar setup in the Origami King, especially since both games keep their stories concentrated at the very beginning and the last third of the game. They had a real opportunity to bring together a lot of the diverse elements and minor story beats together into something really meaningful, but they didn't take it. Now don't get me wrong, aside from Super, none of the other Paper Mario games really put too much effort into the musical storytelling. It's just with all the great stuff about the soundtrack, this is the greatest missed opportunity. There is some continuity. Bobby gets a theme that gets used in regular lullaby and an encouragement track. But Bob-omb's Determination is just a rearrangement of the Sweet Paper Valley theme. The problem isn't that it pulls from the Sweet Paper Valley theme, no. The problem is that it makes no effort to connect itself back to the character's established musical identity. There's a bunch of motifs like this that are really underutilized. Olivia does get a somewhat recurring theme. And so does Ollie. But neither of them show up often or consistently enough to be noticeable. And again, none of the themes are ever combined, meaning the music struggles to convey more than one idea at a time. This game has a relatively large composition team with 5 different people credited for composition, so it's not surprising to find some inconsistencies and variation among the different tracks. I just wish the sound director, composition lead, and series veteran Yoshito Sekigawa put a little more control over the game's melodic material. Still, despite this shortcoming, Origami King manages to pull from the best qualities across the series' long history. Its music is cleverly and expertly composed. It strikes a fantastic balance between locations, events, and story, and utilizes more adaptive scoring techniques than the rest of the series combined. After over 30 hours of gameplay and much more time writing and editing this video, I've decided to give Origami King's soundtrack another 10 out of 10. Much like how Super Paper Mario's technical limitations didn't hold it back from a perfect score, I don't think it would be right to hold back Origami King for its melodic shortcomings, especially since Origami King isn't as story-driven as Super Paper Mario was. Thanks for watching to the end. If at this point you're still wondering about buying the game yourself, I'd say go for it. It's no RPG, but it's a fantastic action-adventure puzzle game. I found interacting with the game's battles and economy very engaging, and the boss battles are an absolute highlight of the experience. The story is light, but still genuinely impactful, and the writing is as clever as always. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing. I have a lot more video topics queued up on various things related to music and its role in game design. I'll also probably post the occasional transcription or piece of music, so, stick around. Oh, and if you know of any interesting cases of adaptive music or any other games that you'd like me to take a look at their soundtracks, let me know in the comments. Until next time.